Thank you, James. And let me first start by thanking the Heartland Institute for putting this together and the good people that work here, Jim Lakely, Keeley, all of you who worked hard not just to put this together, but for your leadership on the climate change issue. It's a difficult thing trying to put out the truth on this. And you guys, I couldn't even imagine being in the battle without you. I represent a group called CFAC, the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, of which I am the president. And for those of you who don't know us, we've been around since 1985. It was founded by a gentleman who was a friend of mine named David Rothbard, now deceased. And it's a group that is dedicated, much like the Heartland Institute, to trying to tout free markets and sound science and things that we feel would be more constructive solutions to energy, environmental type issues. We have a board of academic and scientific advisors of about 50 strong. Some of them you might hear today speaking at this forum. We also have a number of different programs. We do testify before state legislatures, present lawsuits. We have a collegians program that works on America's college campuses. We also have what we consider to be a very robust climate skeptic website called climatedepot.com, which I'd invite all of you to check out if you have not heard or seen it yet. And we, of course, also, more to the point, have been very active in attending these types of UN meetings. This one marks probably about my 28th of these types of UN meetings I've been going to since the mid-1990s. Well, with that said, I will get on to my discussion today, which is framing the issues at COP26 and beyond. Well, if you were here right in the middle of Glasgow, it would seem as though this conference has gotten off just like many of the ones before it. It is absolutely freezing cold right now. Delegates are bundled up trying to get into the conference. We've come to term this the Gore Effect, which it typically is at every time it seems that there's a global warming conference of some sort. Weather turns south. But what you will hear also at every single conference is not just the complaints about the weather, but the dire warnings that the end is near. What we're going to be discussing here today, I tell you, is the most important issue facing humanity. For some of you, you might have thought it was immigration, or maybe how we're going to handle the threat with China or other things. But no, it's climate change. And why is that? Well, of course it's because the President of the United States, our president, says it is. Joe Biden calls climate change not the number 2, not the number 3, but the number 1 issue facing humanity. I'm seeing some skeptical faces maybe out there in the audience. Well, just yesterday he apologized to world leaders for Trump's exit from the Paris Accords. It is, in his mind, the most important thing. Okay, maybe that doesn't convince you just because the president believes it is. How about the inventor of the internet, the Nobel Prize winning, Academy Award winning Al Gore, who says climate change is the biggest challenge we've ever faced? Yep. No, I'm still seeing skeptical faces out there. Well, I actually had a chance to bump into Al Gore just yesterday. I can't show the full video, but he's all masked up right here. And, if he truly thinks it is the most cataclysmic thing that happened to mankind, I just question why his home in Tennessee uses so much more electricity per month than the average American does per year. I had occasion to ask him that question, and no surprise, he didn't answer it. Well, maybe you don't believe Al Gore and our president, but this person, Greta Thunberg, solving the climate crisis is the greatest, most complex challenge that Homo sapiens have ever faced. And she should know. She's 20 years old now? And lived such a full life. She is clearly a source that knows that that's the case, right? I'm still seeing skepticism. Well, maybe you in the audience and watching this don't think climate change is the most pressing issue facing humanity, but they sure do. And they're not just worried about it, but they feel it needs to be solved now. Why is that? Because we're told by people like AOC, we only have 12 years left to solve it before the apocalypse. Of course, she said that about 3 years ago, so I guess we only have, 9 years left. Then you have people like Prince Charles telling us that she's being a bit optimistic. In truth, we have only 18 months to solve it. And then you have the Guardian saying that we have only, 6 months to solve it. Of course, they made this about 2 years ago. And then you have David Attenborough saying it's already too late. Nothing can be done. The end is come. So no matter what we do, we're going to die. So that concludes my talk for today. And I thank you. No, just joking. We actually will continue to discuss it. Since there's nothing that can be done, we may as well go home, right? No. In truth, the climate is not facing a dire apocalypse. You're going to hear from speakers after me that showcase that, in fact, the world is doing fine. But you are going to hear a lot of messaging here and a lot of key issues discussed. Among them, and the slogan that is used is called Keeping 1.5 Alive, as though the world can actually get together and governmentally dictate what the world's temperature is going to be in the future. And that is to stop the Earth from rising 1.5 degrees. That is kind of the mantra, the slogan of this particular conference, and it's parroted about and all over. The other thing that you're going to hear at this conference is talk about net zero emissions goals. And that's a real concerted effort to try to make sure that we don't put out more carbon dioxide than we take in, or even in fact, like The Economist magazine just put out this week, they actually want to push our economies to doing negative emissions goals. That is planting more trees and doing things to be able to suck up more CO2 than we actually emit. Another thing talked about is nationally determined contributions. We have a number of countries out there that are demanding, particularly countries in the West like the United States and Western Europe, to be able to make sure that they reach their deadlines. Other countries like India and China, of course, are given kind of passes with distant, vague goals, such as by the year 2030, maybe capping their emissions, and by 2050 or 60, starting to reduce them many generations later. Ironically, just yesterday at one of the COP sessions I talked about, they actually had a bunch of people discussing whether or not it's even right for us to have any sort of determined contributions by the developing world, given that the West has already devastated the Earth and it's from them that all the price must be paid. You have also talk of loss and damage. This is an attempt by many of the climate activists at this conference to be able to say that every time a typhoon strikes some third world country, anytime an earthquake happens, that it is the fault of those in the developed world because maybe that typhoon or a hurricane might have been a category 2 instead of a category 4, and that the West should be on the hook for paying for the excess damage caused by that catastrophic hurricane from driving all the SUVs and putting out all the emissions it has. That's being discussed here. And you also have the very present thing of the Green Climate Fund. This started at about $100 billion back about 6, 7, 8 years ago. Has since eked its way up to about $500 billion, and now the talk is moving it up to $750 billion, with some proposals moving it up to $1.2 trillion annually, principally funded by all the developed nations to help the less developed nations be able to meet their economic growth without contributing to climate change. These are the big issues that are being framed here currently by the left. What they have in common is this belief that man is basically hammering the planet, that we're turning it on fire, and that it's man's responsibility to shoulder the burden and bring our environment back to full health. There are some subcategory issues that are being talked about as well. You have issues such as environmental racism. And you will see that many of the workshops here talk about how somehow global warming is exacerbating the problems of racial tensions. You also have those who talk about ecofeminism here. There was a workshop just yesterday on that as well. Indigenous peoples and how they're adversely impacted. We, in fact, had a chance to meet some yesterday and gave out some copies of our groundbreaking movie, Climate Hustle 2. which they eagerly received. But that's not what they're talking about. They are trying to bring them into the fold as being one of the core constituencies to forward the climate messaging to the world. Environmental education is another big one that's being messaged here in the COP, as well as corporate accountability, trying to get the corporate America in corporate world, really, some of these multinationals, to fund much of the efforts to tackle climate change. If you were to wrap all these together, what you often see is that there is a kind of what used to be called a watermelon look at the environmental movement. It appears very green on the outside, but red, as in communistic red, on the inside. There is a sense when you walk through the green zone. You have a blue zone here in the COP, which is an official delegation, but you have a green zone as well, where a lot of these NGOs congregate, that many of them are to the far left. It's not uncommon to see things even like a hammer and sickle or things like that that are put about on just regular tables or booths in these particular events, and they just tout the need for global socialism, collectivism, and all the isms that kind of are grouped together on the far left. And that is kind of the message that they're selling here. How do we oppose that? What is it that we, as people who are in the realist community, those of us who are trying to promote a different message, how do we make an impact when these are the things that are being discussed at this conference? Well, one of the things we've done at CFACT is we've been interjecting. You can't influence something that you're not part of. So we've always encouraged, and we've been, as I say, going to these things for about 30 years, but other groups have started to join in. And one of them that has been here for a little bit is the Heartland, but we also have the Competitive Enterprise Institute. You'll see some other free market and private policy organizations on the conservative or libertarian side starting to enter here. And we encourage them, if you're going to have an impact on any messaging, come here. And also applying the techniques to a degree of Saul Alinsky. That is, if we have the numbers, which we don't when we're surrounded by a bunch of leftists here, when you have numbers, you can parade them. That's what they do. But if you don't, you can at least stink up the place. And to our way of thinking, if we're going to frame the issues, one of the things we have to do is not necessarily take them head on all the time, but if you're going to go into a conference like this, try to maybe get the focus of attention to go on some issues of our choice. I thought the way that I'd handle this is actually give a couple real world examples of how we were able to do this. And having gone to a bunch of these conferences, we've had some successes in derailing some of the agenda that they've done on the other side. And I thought I'd share them with you, kind of storytelling time. One of them that comes to mind is on the issue of sustainable development, which incorporates global warming, but really all these other issues that I talked about as well. In fact, the left kind of wraps up the climate issue with a bunch of other social justice issues, calls it sustainable development. And one of those issues, of course, is even religion. And this was the 10th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit, which was a big shindig, which kicked off all this latest round of environmental stuff. But this took place in South Africa, and they even brought in an Ark of the Covenant, because they thought the old 10 Commandments, the ones about adultery and murder and that, had been outdated, and so they needed to bring in a new ethos, which is all about recycling and making sure our carbon footprint is low and things of that sort. So that's how they kind of kicked off the conference. And we really had kind of a ragtag group of activists, collegians and others, to go into this big eco-fest and try and make a difference. What did we do? Well, what we did is we teamed up with some other partners on the ground. One of them was the Free Market Foundation of South Africa, headed by a guy named Leon Lowe. We also teamed up with the Atlas Institute and a couple others to try to get a counter message, one that promoted free markets and not fair trade, as was the big case in this particular conference. Now, one of the interesting things was, because the messaging coming out of this was all about the other side, was we needed to try to get numbers on our side. How could we do that? A little known fact is that when the UN goes into a particular zone, such as they did in Johannesburg, is they kick out all the residents that live in that particular zone. It actually becomes UN property for a very brief time. That displaced a lot of workers. There were people that had legitimate businesses. There were even people like prostitutes that were thrown out of work in this particular area who were very upset at the UN. Leon got the idea. He said, why don't we bring these people together, these who are all ticked off at the UN, and put them to good use? And through a process of educating them, we did some workshops in that, had them on our side completely convinced, and they were already naturally predisposed to our way of thinking, being capitalists, that the UN's solution of more government and less energy was not going to benefit them in South Africa. So our numbers went from that little gaggle that you saw at first to a huge crowd. We had hundreds and hundreds of people storm the UN conference in South Africa. This made news and was able to change the debate. One of the biggest things that came out of this particular conference was not anything that the left was trying to promote, but what our side was promoting, which was summed up in this one thing, Freedom 21, not Agenda 21. Another good example of this happened to be in Copenhagen, Denmark. This was one of the important ones, COP 15. It was here that President Obama, having just taken office, was supposed to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, the new Kyoto Protocol. It was like a Kyoto 2 of sort. It's pre-Paris, and everything, the stage was set for that to take place. But we were able to derail it by getting the truth out there. While they wanted to make this a big fest, fortunately, some news events happened in our favor. One of them was apparently some emails at East Anglia got hacked, and they were able to be sent around the world. One of the people who did that was Mark Morano. He was actually in California at the time when the news came to him, and he was able to get that message out. That created a lot of stir and a lot of questions about whether or not the science that was being carried out by those who promoted global warming was actually accurate. Well, playing upon that, we decided to hold a series of press briefings in various European capitals. I think, Christopher, you were part of some of these. And we went to Brussels itself, Berlin, and even Copenhagen, assembling a good number of scientists along the way. And in each of these particular capitals and venues, a lot of media were invited and interacted with us, and it made front page news like you wouldn't believe. The left was still not deterred, however, and still had massive amounts of protesters that they had brought into Copenhagen, to which we were able to organize some young students to come out, mostly from Norway, to act as counter-protesters. And that also proved to be highly effective in blunting some of the media and attention of that. We were also able to do some theater. Greenpeace had been going around to various European capitals, dropping banners off of various buildings, public buildings, business buildings, drawing attention to the need that we had to act now, get this treaty signed. We decided to drop one off of their own ship. First, the Rainbow Warrior, and later we went alongside, first the Arctic Sunrise, and then secondly, the Rainbow Warrior. This drew enormous attention to what our message was that the science wasn't settled. At the end of the day, they did not get what they wanted. It was also helpful that there was a major snowstorm and they all got stuck in Copenhagen. Again, the Gore Effect struck, and we were able to derail yet another attempt to bring the world under the global warming banner. There are many other examples I could cite. I think of one in Peru where they went down and they were trying to make climate change a major issue, and we were able to make them the issue by virtue of the fact that they had desecrated the Nazca lines down in Peru, even leading to the arrest of some Greenpeace officials. But I guess I would just like to sum it all up by saying that, in my opinion, the most important thing that our side can do is to make sure that our messaging and framing doesn't necessarily try to compete head on with what they're doing, but instead we showcase where they're weak. And where they're weak is principally in the area of hurting and impacting the poor, corruption, money, how it'll hurt the economy. And if we focus on those particular things, I think we're able to make an inroad and frame the issues in a way that we can actually, hopefully, turn this thing around and gain the initiative. So at this point, do we take questions?
Do we have any questions from online? I don't know about, there's not so much questions, but there might be a comment or two, and I think I can be picked up on the microphone from here. This being Jim Lakely and the audience watching the things here. David Maxwell says it's all about the Great Reset disguised in whatever form works. Climate change, COVID, poverty, racism, sexism, secularism, you name it. If you want to react.
All right. So the question is that it's all about the Great Reset. Sexism, popularism, things of that sort. It's generally speaking, and I would agree with that. What you're finding here in this particular, really, it started with the COVID crisis to a large degree. And a lot of the Greens got very jealous, I guess you could say, of the fact that there was such success in keeping people in their homes, locking things down. The economy, of course, of many of the industrialized nations fell, emissions fell. You had a lot of talk about the fact that this was good. You had environmentalists talking about how the earth was healing, and they did not want to see these restrictions released. And so a lot of the discussions, and you'll even see this here right now in Glasgow, where discussions are going on about how do we carry on the good progress that was made during the COVID lockdowns into perhaps climate lockdowns. And you have credit card companies like MasterCard coming out now with new ways to limit your carbon footprint. Basically, if you fill up with gas too much or you are able to take too many flights, they will cut off your spending at a certain limit, and you won't be able to charge anymore. These were things that were dreamed about just a few years ago, but now are coming into practice.
Okay, and then just another thing that maybe you can comment on, Craig. It is, the fact that Barack Obama has a beachfront house at Martha's Vineyard, and Al Gore has several homes. I think one of them is on the beach. It seems that and of course, what do we have, 40, 50, or was it 400 private planes that landed?
400 private planes landed, yes.
And I guess the question or the comment I think one of our viewers here would like you to make is, when all these people that are demanding climate action here don't live like we need to have climate action now. I mean, they don't make any sacrifices, but they want us to make all the sacrifices and change our way of life.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, that's actually, again, I cited Saul Alinsky, who actually wrote his Rules for Radicals to help those on the far left. One of his rules is actually to have your opponent try to live up to what they're claiming everybody else should live up to, and they never can, or what their ideals are. And as a matter of fact, I think that's one of the framing things we need to continue to hammer. It's very popular, and I'm sure Heartland finds it with their tweets and Facebook posts. Whenever you show this hypocrisy, it actually undermines literally everything the other person is saying. We have in our film, Climate Hustle 2, numerous examples showing many celebrities, Leonardo DiCaprio taking a vacation in a major yacht. We have people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Harrison Ford flying up the coast just to get a cheeseburger and bragging about that. We actually had a chance to confront Harrison Ford about this in Madrid during the last climate conference, to which he said he's now a vegetarian. We have numerous examples of people flying around the world taking their dogs with them, just to go to the Academy Awards. So every time we get these, I think to do it, this is exactly what we need to focus on.
Okay. I apologize if people watching online can't hear me too well. We're going to get another microphone for the questions you guys or comments you guys are making in the chat. I I think there's a few questions on this. I'll just kind of sum it up, but the American auto industry, or actually the auto industry globally, right?
Right.
They seem to be embracing electric cars, putting everybody in electric cars without really much thought about what that's actually going to do long term, or how we can actually handle that as a society. I know that CFAC points out the hypocrisy in your weekly emails, and people should join your email list.
Absolutely.
You see news about this all the time, and there just seems to be the auto industry being one of them, embracing these policies that don't seem to make sense and to create products that a lot of people don't want.
Jim, that's exactly right. And as a matter of fact, we have several. We put them out in the form of tweets and social media, which is another way to frame the issue, because I think our popular culture actually works a lot on social media. Pictures of, recharging stations literally right next to a diesel pump. And I think who brought this forward brilliantly is Michael Moore and his Planet of the Humans. And if you haven't seen that show, I highly recommend it. While he buys into a lot of the climate hype, and in fact, it's a fairly depressing movie because he said, the climate is going to destroy us all. That's false. However, his looking at the electric cars in particular showcased how crazy that was. I mean, he goes to in fact, solar power's shortcomings on a whole host of levels. He goes to a particular all renewable rock concert, and it's raining out, and wondering where the musicians are getting the electricity for their amps and microphones and things like that. Well, he looks around behind the truck and he sees a diesel generator running it and confronts them about it. He goes and checks out a corporation which is showcasing a new charging, how quickly it can recharge a car. Of course, most people have to wait about 40 minutes to recharge an electric car. This company's bragging they got one that can do it in half the time. He said that's good, but and he points out very rightly, where's that electricity coming from that recharges the car? Well, he traced it back, and lo and behold, it went to a coal-fired power plant. If we are going to go all electric, the amount of energy that's going to be needed to feed that fleet of cars is going to be enormous. And to expect that you can get that from intermittent wind, solar energy is bananas. And that essentially was what the movie was saying. And to that, I give great commendation. I think that he saw the light in that particular movie. That's why I strongly recommend it. If you want to just get a good lesson on its shortcomings, that's one way to do it in an entertaining way.
All right, one last question. This is from viewer WOTRT Noobs.
Okay.
I love the names that people give themselves as avatars. Anyway, this is a comment, and I think this is something you can certainly speak to. The radicals are trying to unperson climate realists and skeptics and even demonize us. And maybe you could talk a little bit about, well, the truth of that statement, obviously, but how CFAC deals with that as the target of much of that hate that goes on, and how you would advise others to deal with it.
Oh, you got to have a sense of humor. To be honest with you, I think we always joke, to know us is to love us. But I honestly think, for the most part, that sort of demonization, I think, is a positive in this regard, because they can create such a monster that when you come across disarmingly pleasant and nice, it really kind of undercuts the rest of their message when they get to meet a climate skeptic. I think it was Ronald Reagan who I think did it best. It always seemed odd to me when Sam Donaldson back in the day would go after him and just viciously attack him. And Reagan would smile and go, Sam, and just gently go back. Margaret Thatcher, another one. I think it is good for our side to answer softly. It's kind of biblical, and firmly, but with a smile. And I honestly think they get desperate when they go after the people directly, and it plays into our hands. So, have thick skin, have fun, smile. You know how you can find the climate realists at the COP conference? Whenever you see these booths and tables, you got a lot of people looking very dour and sour and depressed. Why? Because the end of the earth is coming. We're all going to die. You look over at a Heartland booth or a CFAC booth or that, we're laughing, we're having fun. Guess what happens? It attracts people. And I think it's to our benefit for them to attack us, and keep it coming. And it's sad. I mean, it's hurtful at times, but you know, you count those that you don't. You just make friends and plow through it, and I think good things will come.